Imagine a world before humans. A wild, desolate, and deadly earth. No cities, no technology. Just jungles, wildfire, and beasts that ruled. Amidst the chaos, a group of ancient creatures, our distant ancestors, fought desperately for survival. They weren't human. Not yet. But their every step led us toward what we know today. Civilization. In this story, you'll witness the harshness of life in a time when one mistake could mean the end of everything. From fighting over a carcass with lions, to escaping from a merciless giant hyena. They had only rocks, courage, and the instinct to survive. Before you read the first chapter, try to imagine. If you were living in that era, with nothing, would you have survived? Tell us in the comments what you think was the most extreme part of their struggle. And if you have your own theory about how our ancestors triumphed over nature, we want to know. The story begins now. And remember, before there were humans, the world belonged to no one. 800,000 years ago, the earth was not as we know it today. There were no cities, no sounds of machinery, no trace of humans. Dense forests stretched as far as the eye could see. Active volcanoes puffed smoke into the dark sky. The Earth's temperature fluctuated drastically, sometimes freezing like the poles, sometimes burning like hell. In the Eastern Hemisphere, the landmass of East Africa witnessed the birth of ancient creatures far removed from modern humans. They had no language, no fire, and lived entirely by instinct. Amidst the wild expanse of the savanna lived a small group of a now extinct species, Homo erectus. Their bodies were sturdy and strong, their faces hard with prominent eyebrows, and their hands were beginning to grasp sharp stones for survival. They had no homes, no shelter. During the day, they had to walk for miles in search of wild fruit, roots, or animal carcasses abandoned by predators. But every step was a gamble. Behind a bush, a saber-toothed cat might wait silently. This group of Homo erectus was led by a dominant male named Kama. He doesn't know what leadership is, but his large size and sharp gaze make the others follow him. Kama knows only one thing: survival. One morning, a thin mist still hung over the grass when Kama smelled an unusual odor. Fresh carcass. He led his group closer. A giant buffalo lay with its neck ripped open, the traces of lion bites still clearly visible. They knew this could be dinner, or the end of their lives. Kama gave a harsh growl, urging the others to be careful. A young cub of the group, Turo, was impatient. He ran ahead, approaching the carcass with sparkling eyes. But before he could tear into the flesh, the bushes on the other side shook. From there emerged 3 lionesses, walking slowly, their gazes fixed on the Homo erectus group. The lions weren't finished yet. They only stepped aside for a moment to let a swarm of flies hover around the fresh blood. Turo froze. Kama stepped forward, standing between Turo and the lions. No spear. No fire. Just a sharp stone in his right hand, and a courage that was a thin line between recklessness and desperation. The wind stopped. Time seemed to freeze. Kama lifted the stone, emitting a low, chest-shaking sound. The lions growled. One more step and blood would be spilled. This is not a fight for dominance. It's a matter of who's hungry, and who's crazy enough to survive in a world that doesn't know humans. The lions backed away slightly, not out of fear, but out of confusion. They had never seen a creature like Kama challenge them without running. No fangs, no claws. Just a rock in his hand and eyes full of wild courage. Kama knew they didn't have long. He looked at Turo, then growled softly, commanding him to retreat. Turo, still trembling, stepped slowly back, while the lions began to form a semicircle. One of them crouched, ready to pounce. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the right side. Gravel and dirt flew. An elderly female of the Homo erectus group, Sima, threw a large rock at the lion. The rock missed, but it was enough to make the predator take 2 steps back. That was enough. Kama raised his hand, growled loudly, and with surprising speed, threw a sharp rock at the nearest lion. The rock struck the beast's shoulder and scraped its hide, causing a small but painful wound. The lion roared and retreated quickly. Seeing one of their own wounded, the other two lions also retreated. They had come to their senses. The meat wasn't worth the risk. They slowly retreated into the bushes, disappearing into the morning mist that hadn't yet fully lifted. Instantly, the Kama group pounced on the buffalo carcass. Time was short. In tense silence, they began tearing at the flesh with rough stones and their own hooves. The blood, still warm, splashed onto their faces and chests. Turo bit directly into the torn neck, his eyes gleaming with a small victory that had nearly killed him. But the joy was short-lived. From a distance came a lower, deeper roar. It wasn't a lion. Not a common predator. A giant prehistoric hyena emerged from behind the hill, its body twice the size of a modern hyena, its fangs like curved sickles. Behind it, dozens of pairs of eyes watched silently. Kama stared at the creature. This time he knew. To fight would mean death. But to surrender would mean starvation. He had to choose. Stay or run. That choice would determine not only his fate, but perhaps the fate of his species. Kama stood still, his muscles tense, his breath ragged. In front of him, the giant hyena slowly walked, as if knowing that no creature on earth could challenge him. Behind him, 20 other hyenas spread out in a semicircle. Tactics. They hadn't come to share. They'd come to dominate. Turo gripped a small rock, his eyes brimming with anger. But Kama restrained his movements with a single piercing glance. This wasn't a fight they could win. In an instant, Kama let out a single growl and then slammed the rock hard against the ground as a signal. The entire group understood immediately. They dropped the remains of the meat and retreated toward the bushes and rocks where they could hide. The hyenas charged the buffalo carcass, the sound of their jaws snapping against bone sounding like the ripping of old wood. Kama and his group hid, watching silently. Not because they were weak, but because they knew. Survival doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it means knowing when to give up. Night fell. The sky reddened before turning dark. The air grew cold, and the sounds of the forest changed. The hyenas' sounds began to fade, replaced by the howls of ancient wolves and the distant clatter of rocks falling from the cliff. Kama sat beneath an acacia tree, his body exhausted, but his mind still alert. Beside him, Turo chewed on a bitter root they had dug up as a substitute for dinner. The boy's eyes were not downcast, nor was he angry. There was only hunger. And a new lesson. The lesson that this world knows no mercy. The next day they would hunt again. They might fail. They might die. But they might also find a new way. A way never tried before. The next day, Seema began rubbing 2 stones together, not to cut, but to produce a tiny spark. Neither realized that it was the beginning. A tiny trace of a great idea that would shape the future of humanity. They did not know that amidst their fear, hunger, and despair, a power was slowly growing, the instinct to learn, and to outlast all other creatures.